Sorry, Ben. I'm really tired. So I'm sorry, everybody. I mean, I got woken up at 3 o'clock last night. My friend Owen calls me up on the phone and he's just rambling on, and I can hear my friend Jack in the background. They're 420 friendly. I mean, they like to have edibles and whatever, and that's totally fine. But they just kept talking and talking and talking for like 45 minutes, and I was so tired. What could I do? He called me with Jack High.
Very nice, man. Very nice. Welcome, everybody, to a special Jack High edition of the Two Fish at the Table Poker Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Legend of Venom Poker Stars.
Merry Christmas, everyone. I'm one of your hosts, East Coast Sam. We've got a very exciting episode. I'm really stoked for this. We've got the Heads Up Championship. We've got the Grudge matches, and we've got national championships. This is going to be a great episode.
Yeah, so having kind of covered pretty much all the main events in America and Europe and among other and one drop and everything, I thought it was only appropriate to cover the other side of the poker world that maybe doesn't get talked about as much, the circuit, the grinding, the culture that is, to the smaller buy-in events that really you don't really see on TV all that much. And that is what the national championships particularly are all about. And that is why we decided to cover these. A lot of these were broadcast on ESPN, so we will talk about them and the slow evolution of this tournament. It's a different kind of event than what we discussed before.
Yeah, I mean, they really play up that these are a lot of semi-professional and professional players who are touring the country, kind of like rock stars or whatever. People haven't made the big leagues, gotten nominated for Grammys, but they just touring around the country. I mean, that's what these guys are. I mean, they're committed to the game. They know the game. They really want to take their game to the next level. And here's their opportunity to get on a big stage and win a bracelet. And I really like how the coverage plays that up.
Yeah, and these events, we're so used to these 4, 5, 6-digit buy-in events. These are more kind of in the hundreds, maybe low thousands, as far as buy-in events that comprise the World Series Poker circuit. And we're going all over the country. One of the big slogans is 12 rings in 12 days.
Right.
In Vegas, they play for bracelets. In the circuit, they play for rings. And while, to my surprise, I don't think that the all-time ring list maybe even beats Hellmuth 16 bracelets, or maybe someone has by now. We're so often talking about poker pros in how many bracelets they've won, or I guess other WPT events or whatever. That kind of gets that sort of the headline, but I think the ring scene is underrated and underreported in the poker world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen in the pod, in the main event coverage before, it's mentioned, when somebody has 6, 7, or 8 rings. But here we really get a better sense of what this scene is like. And I would definitely like to see Poker Go or ESPN step up and really sort of show some of these events in a little bit more detail, because I think they could have a lot of more interesting characters. You hear a lot of interesting stories in these episodes that we'll get into. I really think that there's something here that they're missing.
Not to mention the actual championship structure kind of draws in that sort of like tennis world ranking vibe, where some players qualify to even be in the event to begin with.
Yeah.
Whether they get a free buy-in or they have to pay $10,000 to buy in. That's something that, I kind of reminds me of the Epic Poker League, the short-lived poker league kind of had their, among the corruption, it did have a structure that kind of, again, had a qualifying, club sort of mentality or leadership role in the poker world of, you get to be a part of this, not that you can just buy your way in blindly. So that was kind of cool. But before we even touch that, we'll be discussing a couple of the kind of the one-off or 2-episode off broadcasts of a few events that took place before the 2011 TV season got to the main event, and that being the 2011 Heads Up Championship, which got many name drops during the 2011 and 2013 main events of Jay Cody and Anthony Shingo being a big part of that. And then also the 1 episode each, but there's 2 of them, grudge match episodes, which was kind of an interesting way to kind of give us some classic heads up matches that you probably could maybe see at random, maybe if it was during the Heads Up Championship, on NBC that was airing, inconsistently at the time. But nonetheless, we get that here on ESPN as well. And these are all going to all fun on Poker Go in the bracelet event section under 2011. So we Knew about these for a while, but we chose now to finally go into them.
Yeah, I mean, how the main event is covered and how these events are covered are just very different. With the main event, there's a lot of long form storytelling. We see it from day one or maybe day three all the way onward. But with these events, we're going, straight to the final four. We're going to for the grudge match, really just sort of a best of reel showing us what these best hands were. And I think it's an interesting style of storytelling. I mean, yeah, you're cutting out a lot of the narratives, you're cutting out a lot of the opportunities to really get more information about these people, but there is some very good poker on display here. So I'm, happy with this.
And this was actually the second event of the entire World Series of Poker schedule in 2011. Heads Up Poker is its own category of poker. So many tournaments, players will discuss how when it gets to the final table, people are so inexperienced when it comes to shorter and shorter handed play. Besides maybe 6 maxes and 9 maxes, as you get down to the final 4, 3, 2, people misplay or don't know quite how to mix up the numbers in their head as far as adjustments. So with Heads Up, really, there's some poker players, Doug Polk and Negraenu, of course, having that infamous feud last year. It gets a bit more press nowadays. And so this tournament in 2011, though, was 128 players paying $25,000 to buy in. So that's 7 rounds to get to the win. That meant about $851,000 for first place. And to my surprise, I did not know this, that they had this sort of a structure called the add-on structure.
Right.
You were given basically 3 1/3 stacks, and you could add those on into the match at any time. And even if you busted, you could still add on. So that's something that I might have not realized at first. I thought maybe if you busted, then it didn't matter. It should have added on sooner. But you kind of have 2 extra lives of sorts, or you could kind of pile on chips to kind of overwhelmingly get, finish off your opponent. There's a lot of strategy that can come into play that I would love to actually maybe try sometime in the future. That'd be pretty cool. And that's really kind of the main difference between this Heads Up kind of match and maybe the Heads Up Championship nowadays. You don't see that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I was really surprised to see that. I didn't know that was a thing, and I do like it. I think they mentioned on the broadcast that the reason why they do that is to take away luck, essentially. I mean, somebody might get a cooler and then you lose all your stack. Like just today, I was playing poker. I had pocket kings. I shoved all in. The guy had pocket 3s, and the flop came up a 3. It was nice to have had a buy-in there where I could have undone that and kept going with the match. I like that a lot. And when you're playing for this much money, I think you should have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah. And again, the Heads Up Championship divided into 2 episodes. The first episode covering the semifinals and episode 2 covering the finals. And they do mention a little bit about what happened in the earlier rounds, who played through, who to get to that point in the tournament. So it's not a complete, incomplete story. We do get some of the overall structure of the entire field of that tournament. And because episode 1 has to cover 2 different semifinal matches, the pacing is pretty fast. So getting into the action, I guess, here, each player gets 800,000 chips to start. Blinds are 5K, 10K, and of course they can use those 2 add-ons to add in an extra 800K as they see fit. And the first match being our boy Yevgeny Timoshenko, who we know from 2013, making that day 7 run, being a fairly prominent player during that edit. And again, Eric Florich, who I'm less familiar with, but obviously must have some very good poker chops to be at the final 4 in this event to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, and Timoshenko is really the sort of golden boy of this match. He does win, so it makes sense they would play him up a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the hands seem to go his way. I mean, Froelich just couldn't really get a whole lot of momentum going. And then, another thing about this coverage as well that we didn't mention is there is Kara Scott, there is Poker Tells. This is sort of, it's not too different from the 2011 coverage, except for the fact that it's more streamlined and narrativized. But there are still those elements in there which add, a nice, Poker Tells isn't super essential. It's kind of, I don't really know how reliable tells are at the poker table. But, it's kind of a nice little break for the episode to have that.
Well, so it's important to remember that for the 2011 poker season for ESPN, the order of episodes airing was the grudge matches, then the Heads Up Championship, then the PPC, then the main event. So this, although we'll cover the grudge matches in a few minutes here, this again was kind of, if you were tuning in for the first time that year, you were seeing the bracelet moments segments, you were seeing the Poker Tells segments, you were seeing the pro analysis segments for the first time. And again, We have discussed this long before when we covered 2011 in a previous podcast, but I wasn't really a fan of any of these segments.
Yeah.
I like the studio. I like the style of the editing. I like the live feel. That hasn't changed for me since we talked about it last year. But the segments for me really kind of not so great. Again, the pro analysis so often was just more recap than analysis.
Yeah.
In this case, Brandon Adams, and again, I'm sure they're partially being told what they can say in this bit. I think that Locke and Spaniari got more free reign to sort of talk differently in later iterations of this segment, but that again was kind of a dud. It was kind of cool to see Amir Lehavat, who I met in Vegas last year, get a bracelet in that and the bit here, but it didn't really do much for me in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough. I mean, I don't think the segments are super necessary in this episode. I mean, the poker tells are just all about how bad Gus Hansen's doing. I mean, a lot of the pro analysis is also about how bad Gus Hansen is doing. The emphasis really should be on the poker play, and that is what the emphasis is for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, Timoshenko, he begins his match having to add on after losing an early pot, and then kind of just wins these flips and then is able to kind of run over Eric from then on. The blinds actually get as high as 30K, 60K.
Yeah.
Pretty substantial considering that the starting stack was 800K times 6 would be 4.8 million. So only about 80 big blinds by the end of all, if all the add-ons were in play at that point, which they weren't, because I didn't have to. And so the first match was more about just kind of flips going one person's way, which is kind of unfortunate because that's not really what Heads Up Poker for me is all about. I think Heads Up is about one player trying to outdo the other. And, it's fine if there's all-ins pre-flop if it kind of means that someone got tricked into thinking that their hand was good pre-flop or something. Doesn't really happen here. I think that match 2 was much more exciting from the start, but it was pretty one-sided in both matches.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I mean, Gus Hansen, if you know Gus Hansen, aggro player, any 2 cards, shoving all in every single hand and winning that, Poker Stars thing. And here he is here, and he's just getting outplayed by Jake Cody from the very beginning. I mean, it's stunning. And Hansen just seems so different too. Like he's usually very confident at the table, sort of gets in nice little table talk here and there. He's just like it feels like he's out of his league. It's just crazy.
I mean, Jake Cody, we've seen him in 2 main event broadcasts, really. 2011, I think it was also I want to say 17 or something in that ballpark, 2016 maybe. And he's obviously he had won the poker triple crown by pulling off some big moves that year. He was having a big year, and so obviously he's playing at a high level. But Hansen, in a sense, I kind of liked seeing him get run over. Usually, I'm not the biggest fan of heads up play being so lopsided, but in this case, I was okay with it because it was Gus Hansen. Not because I dislike him, but because of his style and how this sort of outcome was in contrast to how we typically operate at the table.
I mean, I guess so. I mean, Hansen seems like a nice guy. I don't think he's had any scandals or anything. But yeah, I mean, it's just like to hear him just mutter to himself, I've been making too many right decisions. He hasn't made one wrong, as he's mumbling about whether or not he should go all in. It's just like, wow, Like what happened? He just woke up on the wrong side of the bed or something.
The only other observation I really had from this episode was that when they showed the chip graphics of like what each chip information is, they use the wrong like images of chips. Like the colors don't line up with what they were actually using at the table, and that just drove me batty because they do the same thing in episode 2 for the finals as well. You'd think, shouldn't we be kind of fixing that in the edit here? But I guess they don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, again, the emphasis is really on the poker play here. It's on what are these guys doing in terms of, the table talk in the first episode, there wasn't really that much. But in episode 2, it's like a completely different environment. It's like everybody's just like, it really is like a soccer game. Timoshenko and Cody are talking to each other. It's a crazy environment to watch poker in.
Yeah, and so moving on to the finals, I guess, here, because Cody and Timoshenko took it down in the semifinals. The players, again, it's the same exact structure, only they have 1.6 million chips to start, and each add-on is for 1.6 million as opposed to, because in Heads Up Championships, it always doubles the chip counts and everything from round to round because you've, gotten the chips from your opponent from the last round. That's kind of why the numbers get so big. But the blinds begin at the same level, 5K, 10K. And by virtue of there being double the chips, naturally we see the blinds get a lot higher by the end of the match. they actually reach 80K, 160K.
Mm.
And this whole match kind of reminded me a bit of the Iber Salas heads up match, because it kind of begins with one player kind of getting better to start, and then by the end just having kind of bad luck, and the all-ins by the end, when the blinds get high enough that it kind of dictates the action.
Yeah, I mean, toward the end of the episode, it's shove folds. There's a shove call, chop at one point because they both have ace-4. Yeah, I mean, Timoshenko is clearly a very good player. Would have been interesting to have seen a little bit more action toward the end of the episode. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, Cody also just played very well as well. I mean, he, at one point he raises out of turn, and then Timoshenko raises over him, so then Cody shoves. I mean, like, he really, really was keeping the aggression up, putting his foot to the gas, and I think he earned it.
No, I mostly agree. I think that Timoshenko played better and just had bad luck. That's kind of the track of thought I had during watching this. Mm-hmm. I was amused by how the wild card hand almost kind of thought it was backwards, like as if like the wild card hand was the opposite hand, because Cody bets his 7 high twice, and you just don't think of that about that when you see what a wild card hand typically. It's kind of funny. We should mention again the wild card hand, again, the same multiple choice as it would be in the main event afterwards. Again, it's okay for how it's used. Norm kind of going back and forth, with his guests. It's kind of fun to play along to. Because again, this is my first time watching this episode, so I could, truly rewatch these and sort of guess, which hand they're playing for real this time, as opposed to, kind of knowing beforehand the 2011 main event. I did like one of the things that I liked was the how he got here segment, which showed who they played in each round up until that point. That was kind of cool, because better than beats having to Google it up later.
Right.
Besides maybe you mentioned the out of turn raise by Cody. I think really there wasn't any super memorable standout hand as far as like just the dynamics at the table. But it was an okay episode, I guess. I mean, I'm not super high on it, but it wasn't boring, at least.
Yeah, I just found it enjoyable just because of how crazy the environment was. I mean, everybody's cheering. It does seem like everyone's had maybe a little too much to drink, and they're going over to their rails and talking. I mean, it's just kind of interesting to see poker played in an environment like that. But yeah, I mean, the poker play isn't super, super stellar. Again, I do think Cody deserved the win, maybe a little bit more than you do. But yeah, I mean, it was a fun episode to watch, I think.
Yeah. And then the other kind of side event that was native to the 2011 World Series of Poker broadcast were the 2 grudge matches, kind of historical grudge matches. So there's no stakes per se involved, besides maybe pride, ego, and sort of, headlines on the internet for a couple days. So the first one being Phil Hellmuth, my boy, Phil Hellmuth against Johnny Chan in a best of 1 grudge match, which I had totally forgotten that it was only 1 match in this part, where they would have equal a number of chips to begin with if you collectively added up their chip stacks from their infamous 1989 heads up match for the main event championship. Mm-hmm. And blinds beginning at 5K, 10K. So 89 big blinds deep, so very deep to start off with. Obviously that would change by the end of the match. And it was a very unique heads up match. It definitely had more of a narrative to it than maybe the heads up championship had, as far as how the action went from the first hand to the last hand.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Hellmuth and Chan know each other very, very well, and they both respect each other's game, so they're very comfortable talking to each other, doing all sorts of moves, betting dark, checking dark, whatever it might be. So yeah, I mean, it's. The coverage does a good job not necessarily taking one side or the other. I felt like there was a fairly even balance of each of them winning hands, each of them having time to speak to the camera and segments and so on. Yeah, but I mean, it's interesting to watch that it is only one-off. They decided not to give the opportunity to Hellmuth and Chan what they eventually did to Moneymaker and Farha, which is replicate the heads-up match in terms of chip stacks, then flip the stacks to see, would Farha have taken it down had he had the lead, and then done it equally. I would have liked that a lot better, not the least of which because it's Phil Hellmuth and Johnny Chan, and they are just such great table talks. But again, I think this was a fairly enjoyable heads-up match overall.
And then it's really kind of a good 3-act structure to the action. The first act, Hellmuth plays poorly. Johnny Chan controls the early action. Hellmuth Gets a bit testy after a dark bet fails, and then the wild card hand comes. Hellmuth, has a 2-bet shove pre-flop. That's kind of unique. You don't often see that for a wild card hand. But Hellmuth actually drops all the way down to 73,000 chips from a starting stick of 890, goes all in with 10 deuce, and then actually wins that with against Johnny Chan's Jack 6. And then from there, action flop double, another double, another double. He gets up to 1.2 million, has the lead for exactly one hand. Again, this is kind of act 2 at this point. And then Johnny Chan, 18% chance to double up on the river, hits it, and then Hellmuth never gets the chip lead from that point. He had it for one hand.
Yeah, it's if you're an anti-Hellmuth fan, if you're rooting against Phil Hellmuth, this is your episode to watch.
Yeah, so it was the first half was kind of monotonous, and that Chan keeps winning, Chan keeps winning, Chan keeps winning, and then by the flip flopping of the lead after there, it definitely picks up for me. So an amusing little grudge match. Again, it's a grudge match. There's no stakes. They're not playing for the bracelet. They're not playing for any money. They're just playing for the fans basically. And so and this is really kind of the first grudge match we've ever really seen in poker. I can't say I've ever heard of a true grudge match with no real money stakes on the line at any other point in time, really. So
yeah, I can't think of any. Yeah, it's an odd little event to have that there's no prize for the winner. I mean, I imagine they both got appearance fees for this.
yeah.
But beside that, I mean, yeah, it's at least give them a trophy or something. I don't know, make it a little fun.
Yeah. So again, a fairly amusing grudge match, but I actually think that episode 2 was even better with Sam Farha against Moneymaker in a best of 3 match where round 1, actual stacks 5.5 million versus 2.9 million with the actual blinds, that level that they were at when the heads up match began. Then round 2, they flip stacks. And then round 3, if there is a round 3, they take an equal half of the total chips and play on from there. And so you kind of almost expect going into watching this that, okay, probably the chip leader will take that particular round, and we'll see how round 3 goes. That is what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think that structure works because it gives the player who maybe didn't get so lucky a little bit more opportunity to, has that second chance with the chip lead to try to see what would happen. And yeah, I mean, Farha and Moneymaker, again, it's a different rapport than it is with Johnny Chan and Phil Hellmuth. I mean, Moneymaker, I'm not trying to say he's a good player. I'm just saying he's not in the same caliber as Hellmuth and Chan is. And they also, Farha doesn't seem to respect Moneymaker's game that much.
He didn't back then. He doesn't here either. So it's in character. The funny thing is, of these 4 players from these grudge matches, Moneymaker has actually cashed in the last 3 main events, and none of the others have at all. So, I mean, obviously there's more to the poker world and poker scene than the main event, but I mean, results talk, right? So
very true.
Props to Moneymaker there. The second hand of round 1, Sim Farha flops a flush, and then Moneymaker turns a better flush. So pretty sick cooler there. And then a couple of hands later, he has a straight that loses to a rivered full house. And so right off the bat, the story seems to be that Moneymaker is running hot against Farha and already with the chip lead to begin with. So it's just not a good start for Farha.
Yeah, and he ultimately does bust ace 8 versus ace 10 with Moneymaker. Getting there with the ace 8 just goes to show how hot he was running. And then, as you mentioned in the second round, Farha now has the lead that Moneymaker had over him in 2003. And, Moneymaker does hang in there. I mean, let's give him credit. He does manage to double up. He does manage to give Farha a run for his money. But then Moneymaker does eventually lose. And Farha even says justice happens now as he wins, which is
pretty... Well, funny enough, the first round takes up just about half of the episode.
Right.
And so that does put a little bit of pressure on the next 2 rounds to kind of squeeze in enough action to feel meaningful. Sam Farha, he hits a 5-outer on the river to actually take round 2. So, again, he had gotten pretty unlucky in the earlier hands on round 1 and a little bit of round 2. So, as far as shifting the balance of luck, I guess it was kind of karmic in a small sense, just to kind of give him one little bit of life there. But then with round 3, as you say, we get to equal stacks, and there's a wild card hand, a very meh wild card hand in round 3 that I didn't care for.
Yeah,
Farha wins it, and then we get, to be fair, another yet crazy wild cooler for the two players with Jack 2 against Jack 10 on the most action possible flop possible, I guess, besides maybe Jack something. Jack 10 deuce. So both players flop 2 pair. And then, of course, 2 outs to go on the river, Moneymaker hits a deuce to double to 6.4 million, which, if you're checking your math at home, is a 3-1 chip lead at that point with the blinds good enough there.
Yeah, just crazy. Just such a crazy run. I forgot that a hand happened. So I was like, oh my God. I guess Moneymaker loses here. Oh, wait, never mind.
Yeah. And, interspersed, obviously, we have our usual bits, interviews, a very adorable interview with Moneymaker and his daughters, his mental coach, his yoga, and his wife. A kind of nice little family, picture of the Moneymaker scene, which is more touching knowing that, in the pandemic years, Moneymaker was mindful of his children's health and not wanting to put their health at risk to play poker. Now he obviously would still be able to figure it out by the time the main event rolled around, but that was, some context provided here to get that started. We get, of course, a flashback to the infamous Sam Farha Moneymaker 03 hand where Moneymaker bluffs Sam Farha for what could have been the whole game right there. There's not really maybe a bluff quite as momentous as that hand in this episode, but plenty of coolers for those that are like me, big on see those coolers happen.
Yeah, that was the bluff of the century. This might be the cooler of the century.
Possibly. So again, some very good table talk, because it gets kind of pointed on both sides. Moneymaker, definitely less aggressive with his table talk because that's kind of more his character than Farha. But again, so both of these Grudge matches, the Grudge in Grudge really shows through because of the it's not animosity because it's not personal attacks. It's just kind of like it's more about male ego maybe than anything else.
Quite right.
And so my only criticism of these two parts was we didn't really know how long each level was, if it was a number of hands, if it was a number of minutes. That would have been kind of nice to know because we see the levels going up so quickly that we don't really get that information.
Yeah, just a graphic on the screen would have been nice, just saying what hand it was.
Yeah, but overall, so 4 episodes of content here. Nothing super amazing, but I was amused by it for the most part. I think the Grudge was more than the Heads Up Championship.
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in just entertainment in poker, my advice is you should watch the Grudge matches. I mean, they were fun. There's a lot of good table talk. There's personalities on screen that you know about and you're gravitated toward, and they do a good job just letting the hands play out.
Mm-hmm. But that now leads us finally into our discussion of the World of Poker National Championships 2012 through 2016, although they would change the name in 2016 to be the Global Championship.
Right.
Not getting ahead of ourselves here. Going from the start here, the 2012 championship had 157 players. The value of their buy-in is 10K, but the qualifying system was if you could be a circuit event qualifier that allowed you to buy in. Mm-hmm. If you were a main event winner from any of the stops on the circuits, if you were the overall casino points leader at any of the stops on the circuit, or one of the top 84 point earners from the circuit, or one of the top player of the year point earners from, I guess, the year prior. So a little complicated there. And the casino took 0 rake off of all the buy-ins. So it was kind of a way to honor the grinders because you have, pretty big fields because of the buy-in being smaller. Sam Barnhart won the 2011 version that was not broadcast on ESPN or on Poker Go, which we know about from him being featured in the tables on 2011's main events. So $416,000 go to first place for this tournament. These are also the very first episodes of that poker season as well.
Yeah, and as I said, it's really a love letter to these players who have been doing the circuit for so long, and here's their opportunity to be under the bright lights, have the cameras on them, and play for a bracelet. And yeah, I mean, the names aren't super big in 2012. We have Manamu Samechi and we have Sam Stein as sort of the 2 headliners of the table.
And ODB Baker.
Yeah, and ODB Baker to a small extent. I mean, he's barely in the coverage. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's really just a love letter to these people who have spent all this time in the game, and here is their opportunity to do it. And I think these guys make the most of it. there's some interesting play, and we get to hear a lot of interesting stories about these people, saying that making a final table is their dream and they're putting themselves to the test. I mean, they really are putting their hearts on display here.
I mean, I agree with you. The thing is that I was confused by the qualifying structure for 2012. It would be a bit more clear in 2013 because it sounded like, I could be wrong, that they had to buy in no matter what. Like unlike in later years, it seemed like to me, I could be wrong, but that the qualifiers had to still pay 10K, which wouldn't make sense to me because that's, there's circuit grinders that probably don't have as big a bankroll as other players. So I thought that was strange. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. But it was not made clear to me by the bits where Lon explained sort of the whole system there. So if in fact they had to pay 10K, it's definitely a bad deal if you ask me. I don't think it's kind of like, it's kind of like when a business qualifies, oh, you have to be a Super Plus member, but here, pay us this membership fee and you get all this stuff. It's like, well, it's not really a reward then if it's not, a free roll or something. But anyway, getting ahead of myself here. So this final table, 8 players, which will be, like a trend where they don't have, like a final table is not 9 players. I guess that's maybe something reserved for only a special selection of tournaments or Tournament Hold'em events. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Each of these final tables will be comprised of 2 episodes each.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the first episode has significantly fewer bust outs than part 2 does.
Right.
We have 8 players here. You mentioned that we kind of had 3 we would have any prior knowledge of, really, being Stein, Musumeci, and ODB Baker. And wouldn't you believe it, those are the first 3 players out in this part 1. And that really kind of bugged me. That always seems like whoever my horses are in the race, they're the first ones to go in these episodes. It's pretty crazy. Musumeci kind of gets built up as kind of this, being the only woman at the table, the last one standing, that she'll play a big role. But she kind of gets screwed in the very first hand of the episode, the third hand of the night, where she loses most of. She pretty much, the run out is guaranteed to make sure she loses the most chips possible without actually busting. So that kind of cripples her when she's actually loses that hand.
Yeah, it's 2 pair over 2 pair. I mean, there's really nothing you can do there. I mean, I'm surprised Wynn didn't raise at the river there, but yeah, I mean, there's nothing she could have done there. And then she's crippled. She shoves with 9s, and Stone has pocket kings. I mean, there's nothing you can do.
I really had 2 big takeaways from this episode. One being that there was this weird swoosh sound whenever they showed some players' hole cards, like on the hole cam. Like,
yeah,
it was, I think, trying to show like the ad of the sponsor.
Yeah.
Hole cam. But this is the only time in the entire history of ESPN poker coverage that ever happened.
Yeah, I found it distracting.
It was very distracting. I was like confused, and they didn't really draw attention to it at all. So very strange. I mean, first we have a foul table with no commentary at all, and then we have a foul table with swoosh sounds for the whole cam. Very strange how they had these outliers of sound mixing. And then the other major highlight, I guess, would be when Nguyen doubles on the river of pocket 10s against Huang's aces, riverring a straight. That was kind of cool, but I didn't really care for this episode otherwise, besides those 2 observations.
Yeah, Sam Stein talking about how Kobe Bryant was an inspiration to him. That was just kind of like a morbid, sort of thing. Sorry, Kobe, rest in peace, buddy. But just. Ugh. I did like a couple of the segments with Eric Cueso where he's talking about how his mom got him into poker and, the rapport that he has with her. I thought that was heartwarming.
Oh, and I almost forgot to mention the actual blind structure. We had the most unusual blind level of 7K, 14K. That's something you maybe might see online, but I'm just surprised that they used that. It's pretty standard. You kind of go to 612, 816, 1020, but here we have the 714. Which will not recur in future national championships. So I guess maybe they learned their lesson from that awkward structure. But besides, we have a couple others, Eric Cueso, I was really a bit more kind of had a meh reaction overall to this episode.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I mean, Stein and Baker, just their bust outs just get shoved to the end of the episode. As I said, Baker doesn't, he didn't have too many chips. But, have an interview segment or something with him to give him a little bit more presence in the edit. I mean, he just kind of disappears and then busts on the 6th.
I mean, I think maybe the one thing this foul table had over maybe the next couple we'll discuss is that it didn't just have the amateurs go out first.
Yeah.
ones I was rooting for to go up first.
Mhm.
The amateurs, that is. Part two gets us from 5 players down to 1. And I think it was pretty forgettable outside of very solid four-handed action.
Yeah. Mhm.
Very early, we have 3 big stacks and 2 short stacks. Hand number 2 of the episode, Huang bust to stone. And then from there, there's a lot of good chip distribution among the 4 players before the bust outs finally come. And so that was kind of exciting because, obviously it brings back those good memories about the 2010 main event final table where you have all these back and forth all-ins, and that's always fun. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, same here. I mean, Cocoa bust in 4th place, Win bust shortly afterward in 3rd place. Heads up, there's a couple of fun little double up moments, I guess. It's always kind of fun to see one player double up and then the next player doubles up right afterward. But beside that, I mean, yeah, nothing super special about heads up action. Eric Queso does win, which is fairly predictable given that he had a very meaty edit in the coverage throughout. And again, I found his story with his mom heartwarming, and it was nice to see, like not just his mom be in the edit, but also like literally be in a segment and like kiss him and hug him. Like that was heartwarming and sweet. But nothing super special about his play.
Nothing special, but I did kind of appreciate the kind of deja vu of the Chong Duhamel A7 Queens hand, because you kind of get that exact same thing of Stone kind of going a little overly crazy with A7 when Eric was has queens of all hands. So it was kind of a little funny little recurrence of that showdown pre-flop. But yeah, again, not my favorite, and but it's 2 episodes, so it kind of goes in and out pretty quickly, so it's not a huge deal.
Yeah.
Whereas the following year, the 2013 championship, a smaller field this time, 127 players, held in Jerez, New Orleans. We should mention that 2012 was held in Las Vegas, in the Rio, the usual, setup. This one was held in Jerez, New Orleans. 100 qualifiers automatically get spotted to 10K. Each one did attend the event because, come on, who's not going to ignore that offer? And then 100 top pros from both 2011 and 2012 could have bought in, paying 10K, of which 27 players chose to do that, because even if it's 10K and the players are mostly playing for free, it's still a 1 in 127 chance of getting a bracelet. So some of the top pros that can buy in can kind of hopefully try to take advantage of the smaller stakes, less, accustomed to these big money moment situations, to try to spin things in their favor.
Yep, and I'd say the 2 headliners would be Jeremy Osmus and then Max Steinberg, who, Ben, you should probably admit your bias here. You were definitely rooting for him because he was a twin, right?
How'd you know? Wow, that's just blew my mind. Yeah,
I just could guess. But yeah, I mean, they're the 2 headliners. I mean, Osmus, again, kind of he goes in out in 8th, but he does manage to get quite a bit of coverage. His bust out's fairly late, and then Steinberg makes it to heads up. But there is enough with the other people that they are fairly well characterized. No super like heartwarming stories like there was with Aaron Queso, but fair enough that we get a sense of who these people's personalities were.
And much like how the main event Europe's kind of tried to throw in a little bit of the local culture in there, even though it's minor, there is a side bit about how to pronounce New Orleans or Nolans. So that was mildly amusing, I suppose. Episode 1 does cut the table in half. Osmus was second in chips to begin the final table and actually goes out first. So not something you see very often in a post-film world, but kind of cool. Steinberg and Osmus both kind of trend down all episode 1 until Max kind of gets lucky with 10s against Tehan's Kings and Panich's Ace Queen, where Steinberg flops a set and kind of rolls from there. Jonathan Hilton and Steinberg, we both remember from a brief conversation in 2015 when Steinberg was talking to Justin Schwartz and Negraenu about how Hilton had been in the field up until late on day 5, and so he was kind of worried. But oh no, here we go again. This is again the table that they are referring to in that moment back then, I guess in the future from the back then for our perspective. The one interesting change up is when they were showing the table chip counts, they do a little talking head of like the person saying their name. Again, kind of reminds me of NFL football on Monday Night Football, where they would do that when the players go on the field. So that was kind of cool too.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. I was like, whoa, what's that?
Yeah, and again, Steinberg does, of course, have a interview where he talks about playing poker with his twin, how they kind of have similar but different levels of success and styles, or who's better. It's a very twin-like thing to talk about. And Danny Steinberg, who we saw in the 2010 main event Europe final table, he is in the background in the kind of enclosure around the table, and he'll be occasionally cut to. Famously for me in episode 2 after the first hand. So that was again kind of cool because again they look very similar, but they also look just different enough where you can probably tell each one if you were familiar with both of them.
Yeah, we're not alleging that Max and his brother were switching off. Don't worry.
Yeah. So again, not super compelling action in episode 1, but part 2 definitely from the start gets off to a great start where the second most infamous Jack High call in poker history takes place.
Yeah, I mean, Parker makes it 50K with King Queen. Stein calls it with Jack 10. Flop comes out, checks 3 ways. Steinberg has a straight draw, so he makes it 90K on the turn. Hilton has a set, and then Parker, who had also joined, had top, so he calls. And Hilton makes a boat on the river, so he bets 335K. And all right, you're gonna fold, right? You got Jack High. You have just Jack High, so you make the fold, right? But no, he sits and he tanks and he tanks, and then he calls with Jack High, trying to make the hero call.
And again, with the amazing Norm line, if Hilton had 2 traffic tickets, he had a better hand. And again, this is a huge bet. Like it's 335,000 chips. It's over a quarter of Steinberg's stack at that point. And I know that when you put someone on a hand like 10-7 or some sort of a gut shot straight draw that misses and has to bet to win the hand, I get it, but it's such a huge swing that once Hilton takes that pot down, with still 4 players left, he has over half the chips in play. Steinberg's still solidly in second place by this point, but nonetheless, if it's hard not to imagine that had he not called there and kept that sizable chunk of chips, he might have been able to have the math to work out where he would have pulled off the win by the end of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Esfandiari has a pro analysis segment, which is one of probably the best pro analysis segment ever because he's just exasperated. He doesn't, he totally thinks it was like a TV hero call epic moment that Steinberg was trying to pull off. But as he points out correctly, Hilton could easily be bluffing with a queen or a king in his hand. So what are you doing there with Jack 10? You need to fold and move on to the next spot. Especially, I mean, if you feel like you have an experience advantage over him, keep the chips. I mean, why give him chips? It doesn't make any sense.
And, it's funny because really, even though it's 3 and 4 handed for most of the episode, it really still felt like a Hilton versus Steinberg battle because of how active they were with having enough chips. And that was one of the recurring trends in all of these final tables is that the big stacks are, putting money in and the short stacks are really kind of playing tight, playing scared-ish poker, trying to make those pay jumps small before they, before they bust. And so, it's again fitting that even though that they were dominating 3 and 400 play, heads up does eventually devolve into those two squaring off. And for the final, 18 minutes of the episode, it's a fairly even heads up battle. Both players kind of get their chips in. Sometimes with some pretty ill-timed aggression at times, but nonetheless they're not afraid to go for it, and it does show in the back and forth nature of that battle.
Yeah, it was a fun heads up battle to watch. I forgot that Steinberg didn't win. So I was like, oh, who's going to win this? I had a brain fart and I just couldn't remember. But yeah, it was very fun. Steinberg's going over to his rail and getting advice from his brother about, what to do. And you see little subtitles up on the screen, which I haven't seen before in an ESPN episode. So I was like, what is that? Yeah, it was a lot of little fun moments here and there in the heads up battle. And both of them are fairly well characterized. Like I said, Steinberg was sort of the headliner, but Hilton was also getting a lot of segments in this episode talking about his family and his upbringing. So it really did feel like they'd set this up very well.
Mm-hmm. No, I know. I agree. And obviously Steinberg, again, not as big in the poker world as he once was during the sort of early mid 2010s. Obviously, you have a deeper in the main event, finishing in 4th place to John McKeon, Blumenfield, and Beckley. But this is kind of again, this predates his main event run, but it postdates anything else we would have seen from him.
Right.
So again, so part two better than part one, but I would say I like this more than the 2012 table
Yes.
version. But moving on to 2014, again, a very similar kind of leveling out of the field size, 126 players, the same kind of qualifying, but paying 10K if you don't qualify structure, held at Bally's, Atlantic City.
Mm-hmm. And held outside.
And held outside. Luckily, the weather was good. And with the sun slowly setting as things go on, that was kind of cool to see things get slightly darker from the view of outside as action was continuing. But oddly enough, the chips they use, they have the 1K chips, the 5K chips, and then the 10K chips, which you sometimes see in other poker programs. But for the most part, the main event had kind of, or the Worlds of Poker kind of phased out using those in favor of going right from to 5K to 25K. So that was different. And so chip stacks that might look impressive by having all three colors, maybe not worth as much if you're paying attention to how much they have of each chip.
Yeah, and I mean, the tournament being outside is mentioned quite a few times. And there's like a crowd around the tent where people are watching, and I got a little distracted just sort of watching the people. It's on Atlantic City. I mean, the people are going around, going to shops and so on, and some people like walk by, kind of like watch the action for a little bit and then walk away. I was just distracted watching all those people and seeing the crowd change and all that. It makes for an interesting experience.
Yeah, and then once again, they elect to not have the final table be a full ring of 9 players or even 8 players. They had the final 6, which had been kind of the unspoken standard in the main event Europe's at this time, having 6 players be the true final table, which is odd because the tournament aren't really 6 maps. So I'm not quite sure what went into that sort of decision by the higher ups, but nonetheless, we have 6 players. 2 amateurs and 4, like not amateurs, I guess is the best word since I don't know them super well. Ashton being the chip leader, the very long name Polychronopoulos, which gets abbreviated on screen, kind of to me was pretty amusing. Doss, Dominic Nietzsche, Bibb, and Robinson.
Yeah, nobody I knew before, like none of these names registered with me. So it's kind of nice to just, this is my introduction to these players and get a sort of sense of who they are. And there's a recap segment which shows like a bunch of famous people played in this tournament and like only a couple of them cashed. Yes. Nobody really had a deep run. This was not a tournament for the big names.
No, it wasn't. I mean, Nietzsche we had seen in the main event Europe. But so I at least knew him, and I knew Polychronopoulos was a player. I had seen that name listed before on Wikipedia, but I didn't know much beyond then. And so, unfortunately, as I've alluded to before, it always just kind of frustrates me when the amateurs bust first, because it's just more fun if there's amateurs in there to kind of mix things up. It's just more fun for me as who would be an amateur if I was there, for example. So that kind of a little frustrating. Robinson in the third hand busts with 8 big blinds. So again, some of these short stacks, they get handcuffed so early that they really kind of have to go, 8-6 of all things to go out. And then from there, things do slow down. And it takes until the last hand of the episode before we was a player in 5th place. So that was kind of good to let the action breathe. But I really felt bad for Doss when he busted like that, because I was really rooting for him. Yeah,
me too. I mean, Doss gets unlucky the hand before they show him busting, where he has top pair and a better kicker than Panopoulos does. But then Panopoulos rivers it. So Doss bets out 200K and Panopoulos calls him and loses a bunch of his chips. And then he loses on a flip. Ace Jack versus 10. So it would have been nice to see him hang around. They've done a good job developing him, that he's an amateur guy. He's trying to open up a pizzeria and he really likes playing poker. So it's a shame that they couldn't seal the deal with that story.
Yeah, and then episode 2 comes around, 4 players playing down to a winner. And again, one of the most strangest production errors we'll see. We haven't seen this in a very long time, where they keep showing that in the chip counts for Bibb, like a 500 in his chip stack, like 379,500 chips, when the blinds are 10K, 20K. So they phased out the $500 chips forever ago. And so clearly they left a 5 in there when they meant to have a 0 there, but it appears more than once, and it was very strange.
Yeah, I also thought the sound mixing was very bad in these episodes. Like, you could barely hear Lon and Norm talk, but the music was really loud. Like, they really didn't edit these very well.
Now they were outside, so I wonder if maybe just the sound quality or something was different tangibly for this one in particular. So that's possibly an explanation, but I don't know. I feel like sound studios have a lot of power to literally adjust every little decibel of every layer of sound. So that really shouldn't be an excuse.
Yeah, I mean, like I had to like turn the volume up and down because I couldn't hear things. It was just very weird.
Mhm. Now, the first third of this episode is just Polychronopoulos losing a bunch of hands, kind of
Yeah.
emotionally. Bib, who was short stacked for the entirety of 400 play, goes out first. Oh, big shocker. Not so interesting. And then we see a Jack High bluff go wrong. So kind of opposite of a Jack High call. So that was kind of funny. Arnicha wins a huge pot. And then I don't know if you probably didn't have this thought, but there was a hand with aces against king eight. The flop was 9-6-4. Gave me like haunting flashbacks of my cash game where I had aces on that same exact flop. I was like, oh my God. But obviously wasn't against set or anything. But still triggered me a little bit there.
You had to play those aces. I think you did. Come on, it's all good.
I know. And so Ashton busts in a flip to Dominic Nietzsche with pocket threes against ace jack, despite flopping a set. And again, he was chip leader when this whole thing began. So you had to feel kind of bad for him, but not really that he didn't take it down. But third place still not as bad as, say, Osmus going out in eighth with second in chips to start that final table. So it leads to a heads up match that is the final 14 minutes of the episode. And I did not know before watching this who won this match. So that at least made the heads up play feel very fun for me to watch.
Yeah, same here. I mean, Panopoulos had been getting a very big edit because he was sort of the hometown hero, so to speak, even though he lived 4 hours away. But yeah, I mean, they had like one segment with Nietzsche, but it was like Panopoulos heavy. There were segments every 20 minutes about him. So to see him actually lose was a surprise to me because I figured all this editing, he's gonna take it.
Yeah, and so the heads up match, there was one funny bit where ultimately Nietzsche raises after Polly flops the nuts, which is kind of funny because that's just like heaven, poker heaven when that happens to you. Nietzsche was very relaxed at the table. I noticed his body language, his demeanor, and he was so relaxed that he just shoves a flush draw kind of carelessly and gives a complimentary double up to Polychronopoulos. So that's, again, kind of amusing to kind of, and all of a sudden he has to kind of take things seriously because then he's shoving a ace eight and beating ace 10 to win the whole thing by the end. So it's kind of a funny little flip flop there.
Yeah, there was a little graphic on the screen that shows the player's name, their age, and some of their background. And Nish said his favorite player was himself. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. So there was actually only one real interview this whole episode that I even took notes on. Nietzsche kind of managing money and bankroll, and given that we had seen him before, I guess it was okay to see him take it down this time. Again, this is for a regular bracelet, even though that circuit is all about winning rings. This is a true bracelet that holds as much weight as any bracelet, and you could almost kind of argue it's kind of like the common man's bracelet, even though it's not quite. But that's kind of the nickname I would give that bracelet because it's a real bracelet, but it's kind of like a bit more average Joe. But it doesn't take away from the fact that poker pros can still buy into a tournament, and so there's still competition to play against.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there's a goal. It's not like the main event bracelet, which is $100,000 and there's gems and stuff shining on it. It's a normal bracelet. But yeah, I mean, they're really trying to sort of hype up. Like Panopoulos had been playing for a very long time. He'd won bracelets in the past. Nietzsche had won a bracelet in the past. Like these guys have paid their dues, and now they're gonna go heads up for this bracelet.
And so now we come to the 2015 championship, and this was the only one of any of these episodes that I ever saw kind of like live at the time when it like dropped into the television world when it broadcasted. So this is the only one that has any sort of level of nostalgia for me. In this case, not much nostalgia, so to speak. 122 players playing at Harris Cherokee in North Carolina. The same structure, 100 qualifiers, 100 could buy-ins, only 22 ultimately do. But of the final table, 2 players there did qualify in that respect, that being Lonnie Harwood or Lonnie Hui and Daniel Negraenu.
Yep, Daniel Negraenu. We finally have a big player who's playing at the final table. And of course, the coverage is just all about Daniel Negraenu. It's almost like it's Daniel Negraenu and 5 other people, 6 other people, excuse me.
So yeah, again, we have a 7-player final table, oddly enough. Again, two parts, and really the first part is trying to get as much Daniel Negraenu action and table talk and whatnot as possible, because it actually ends with him busting. So
Right.
that's the split there. They play from 7 down to busting 6, so that there's 5 left in episode 1. And this is an episode kind of full of very kind of dry, like Office season 1 sort of table talk. Like it's not quite, not like, it's not grown worthy, but it's just not quite, like amusing, funny, and make you laugh. Especially with sort of coming from Daryl Fish with Negraenu and them kind of being neighbors at the table. They kind of have this back and forth. It's kind of this, again, kind of like almost like inside joke humor where it's not quite funny to anybody else, but for them it's amusing enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think Fish doesn't normally talk like that at the table, but because he's under the bright lights and he's got cameras rolling and D-Negs is there, like he's trying to sort of be funnier and more outgoing. And I don't know if you've ever been in a conversation with somebody where they try to do that. It just, yeah, it comes off as kind of awkward.
Yeah. Now, I would say out of all the final tables in this sort of series here, this one best sort of tries to get into the spirit of the grinder culture, the lower stakes, trying to, make your way up the poker ladder. Negraenu talks about it a few times. In particular, some of the other players get interviews about how they started out. So that kind of helps a bit with adding that sort of vibe to this broadcast. Lonnie Harwood starts far and away the chip lead. She will maintain the chip lead for almost the entire final table, kind of steady club, never really having too many speed bumps. But one of the biggest problems of episode 1 is that by virtue of trying to have a full 46 minutes of Negraenu and in the spotlight, you're going to see a lot of pretty dull hands. And that is also exacerbated by the kind of dull, scared, boring poker on display, as the short stacks are really too afraid to kind of really put too many chips in the middle without like a made hand.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple players who they're there barely. I mean, this guy Muscati just pretty much just folds and folds and folds. St. Vincent, who's another player at the table, doesn't really do a whole lot. Nothing super exciting on display. I mean, Harwood is playing good big stack poker. You can give her props. Negraenu also just doesn't really do anything that exciting either. I mean, he plays fine, but nothing special. There's really nothing to sort of hang your hat on in terms of great poker play.
Yeah, and Negraenu really doesn't win any big or lose any big pots until the very end of the episode. Really, the last sort of 8 or 9 minutes of the episode is really things kind of finally step up in interest for me. The last hand of the 6K, 12K level, Negraenu gets ace king, runs into St. Vincent's aces, goes from second in chips to last place because of how bunched up those stacks really are at the table. And then he wins the first hand of the next level by shoving pre-flop king 7. Launch and irony is okay. And then he finally goes all in again with 2 jacks, runs into ace queen. And then Daryl Fish, as he's sort of watching the run out, is calling the turn in the river, and he's correct on the turn. So everyone's like, no, you stop. No. And then the best shot of the whole episode is Negraanu's face going like when Fish calls the jack of spades correctly on the river.
Yeah, Negraenu, to his credit, after the bad beat, kind of just gets up, shakes everyone's hands and then leaves. And then has a nice segment at the end where he says, like, this reminded me of where I came from as a player. But yeah, that's the highlight of the episode, is just that look on his face. I mean, it's a thumbnail in videos. I've seen it before.
Yes, and then that clip of his face gets reused in the sort of ending montage of the episode. So it was kind of funny. But I guess there was something about buying 10K in 2015 for Negraenu that just led to some good luck, but not too much good luck in these big tournaments. Because again, let's not forget, he got 20 in that year. He got 11th place in the main event, busting to the eventual winner, Joe McKeon. So again, he was obviously, at the top of his game that he could be in that year, and obviously he won the high roller bowl not too long ago. So he's still, a big factor in the poker world. But again, he puts up results. That's why I'm a big fan for him. That's why I've maintained being a big fan of him, even if his table talk wasn't the best in this episode.
Yeah, he talked a lot about being Romanian with another player at the table, and they're talking while other players are in a hand, which I always am a little squeamish about. I mean, I feel like if there's 2 other players in a hand, you should kind of just keep quiet and let them play it out.
I mean, I'm okay if they're like you're like table neighbors and the players in the hands are like on the other side of the table, so you're not like talking through them or like them. I think that's okay, but that doesn't happen here though.
Yeah, that's not what happens. They're like leaning over at each other and like the players are involved in a hand. It's I don't like it.
Episode 2, moving along here, gets us with 5 players left. Harwood still far away in the chip lead. St. Vincent does the classic misclick by grabbing the wrong number of chips, which leads to a re-pop by Harwood, which leads to him losing the hand. So again, even when things are going poorly for other players, Harwood's able to capitalize on that. And then afterwards, he eats a candy bar, and then like mid candy bar loses even more chips to Harwood. So not the best sight for St. Vincent there.
Yeah, very odd.
And then we get some blind versus blind action with Moscati, with pocket tens, somehow in the big blind running into the small blind at St. Vincent's jacks, and then he doubles up. And so, we got some pretty surprising good double ups with some surprise rivers here that definitely elevates the action during the early parts of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, during this episode, it's still the Lonnie Harwood show. I mean, she's got a big stack. She's really not making any mistakes. She's also, she's got the sunglasses on. She's not super emotional at the table. She's not talking to a lot of players, which is again totally fine. But nothing super substantial beside having a candy bar in your mouth, and you have to chew on your options there. So
yeah, and then so the chips kind of fly back and forth. Moscati, Vincent, Daryl Fish, surprised. Oh, double up in the river, double in the river. Oh my God. Daryl Fish hits the case 8 at one point to double up with pocket 8s. And then pretty quickly Moscati and St. Vincent do bust to Harwood to kind of solidify Harwood's sort of chip lead at that point. But then probably the most amusing small bit here was the slightly salty Daryl Fish, when he considers being knit rolled by Masik's Ace Jack, who we haven't talked about at all yet because he was the short stack when this table began and kind of slowly shipped his way up, often through Harwood, to be fair.
Yeah.
But Fish, I mean, Ace Jack in that spot, I know it's 3-handed, but it was a large chunk of Masik's chips. And it's just Masik's giving him credit for Ace Queen, Ace King, or etc. So I don't think that's a net roll, if you ask me.
No, I don't think so either. I mean, yeah, at least to be fair to Fish, at least he didn't, try to avoid shaking his hand and say thanks for the slow roll, right? So,
That's true.
Yeah.
And so by virtue of busting Daryl Fish, Masik actually has the chip lead when heads up play begins, which will span the last third of the episode. Again, it's not a huge chip lead. It's about a 5-4 chip lead. So still, still present, but not insurmountable. And it's a very one-sided edit for the heads up match, sadly.
Yeah, I mean, they had been building Lonnie Harwood this whole time. And so that's just how the coverage plays out. Nothing super exciting in terms of heads up match, nothing super special. Just goes her way.
I don't know if you noticed this though, but one of the interviews for Lonnie Harwood, the end part of it was used in the part 1. Like they had a 30-second block of Harwood talking, in the last 8 seconds they used in episode 1 of this final table. It's very strange. Yeah,
the editing is just super weird. I mentioned last time how the sound mixing was off. I also noticed the sound mixing was off here. The players were super loud and the commentators were quiet. I mean, the commentators, it's post-production that's where material comes in. So I don't understand why the sound would be like that for them and not for the player. I understand prioritizing the players so you can hear them, but it was the volume there. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there were some pretty good norm lines actually in the first half of this episode I kind of liked.
Yeah.
But unfortunately in the back half, it's just a very one-sided heads-up match. Masik's only win in the edit was a pretty small win, so it wasn't even like it was a substantial hand that he won. And so clearly, once Negraenu was out, they're just trying to say Harwood rules the world here. She played great. I'm not saying she didn't deserve it, but I always feel bad for the loser when the edit is so one-sided. When we don't know if it was truly that one-sided.
Yeah, same here.
And so this leads us now to the final component of this look back here. The 2016 Global Casino Championship, once again played in Harris, Cherokee in North Carolina. The same free roll / to combine if you qualify, with, again, surprisingly, almost the exact same number of players. Once again, 126 players. I'm not sure how that kept happening. With 6 players in this final table: El Yusfi, Turner, Pack, Kuther, Small, and Almaty. And you're already, I saw you're like already excited, so I'll let you take away from here. Go for it.
Yeah, so El Yusfi and Almaty are the 2 amateurs at the table. The other four guys, I don't recall hearing their names before. Maybe they've been on earlier coverage. I don't know. Elusifi's got 1.3 million. Almaty's got 236K, which isn't super amount. I mean, you're in dump it or shove it territory. But yeah, I mean, these two guys came to play. I mean, they're happy to be there. They're happy to be mixing it up. They seem comfortable under the bright lights. And yeah, I mean, this is like the Elusifi Almaty show for these two episodes because they go heads up. The two amateurs go heads up. That's what makes this so great. But it's just their show from start to finish, and it's very fun.
It's fun because there's a lot of short stack play mixed here because sometimes you just kind of you're just at the bottom of the chip counts for a long time, and you just have to kind of pick your spots well. And for once, the short stacks don't just bust off in the first half of part one; they kind of hang in there. And once again, the curse of the Jack High call. Elusifi actually does call Almaty. It was a small bet this time. That wasn't as big as Steinberg's call of Jack High, and obviously it fails. We get a great mood ring joke by Norman that made me laugh. Actually, that was kind of funny. So even in 2016, we talked about how we hated the pacing of the main event in 2016. That is not at all a factor here. It's just kind of a very standard edit. Hands don't drag on longer than they need to, so that does help things out here. The chip lead shifts from Elusifi to Turner when Elusifi loses a big pot, and so we kind of get it's not too often we see the chip leader in these championships kind of lose the chips like that. So that was a novelty to start off with.
Yeah, I mean, Elusifi played just a very interesting game. I mean, as you mentioned, he calls with Jack High. He's mixing it up with all sorts of hands. These very odd bet sizes. Small raises it to 45K with ace 8, and Elusifi makes it 145 with pocket tens. Okay, I mean, maybe you want to force the player out, but it's pocket tens. That's pretty good when you're six-handed. Maybe you want to see a flop with it. Yeah, just Jack Deuce he's playing with. I mean, it's crazy.
And so the players that go bust in this episode are Pack and Small, and we really didn't. I wasn't too attached to these guys when they busted, so I was okay with it for once, considering how often my horses in the race go out so early on these final tables. So by episode's end, we're down to 4 players, the blinds at 12K, 24K. Action definitely felt less scared poker than 2015 did in that first part. And the episode, flew by pretty fast at a good clip, so I didn't feel like it dragged at all. And it was, pretty solid, all things considered.
Yeah.
But things get even better, in my opinion, for part 2 when we went from 4 players down to a winner with just probably my favorite episode in this entire roster of ones we discussed today.
Yeah.
I think there's no competition there for the gold there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. I don't know what else to say. I mean, we haven't mentioned this, that Almaty, because he's the short stack, he's going all in. And every time he pushes his chips in, for whatever reason, he says, "Merry Christmas, guys." And I don't know, it's just so funny. Like, the way he says it too, "Merry Christmas, guys." Like, he just pushes his chips in. Like, it's just crazy. Like,
he normally only has like enough chips to make like one stack of it. So we're just kind of like, here you go, one present for you.
And he survives each of his all-ins. I mean, most of the time he has better cards. I mean, he doubles up with ace jack against ace 10, but he just all in after all in after all, and he's still in at the end of it. It's just so crazy.
Yeah, and so Turner is the chip leader with 4 left when episodes begin, and in the first 2 hands he's losing chunks here to Elusifi again, and then he wins some of them back on the 3rd hand. But just off the bat, it's not going to be a smooth sailing for him going forward. We get our first Almaty Merry Christmas against Kuther, who then busted Turner right afterwards in 4th place. So Turner, despite some bad luck to start off with, because we had kind of 2 big stacks and 2 small stacks when 400 play was going on, he's still fairly in the mix with 3 left here. And then things just go pretty horrible for Turner. Pair against overpair a couple times, and Elusifi actually. Almaty finally kind of gets some chips at 1.4 million once. He doubles up a couple times through Turner, and then from there things don't go so well for Turner.
Yeah, I mean, Elusifi manages to get Turner off of a hand, raising it to 555K, and then even looks over at him and says, "Stop stealing my hands." I mean, these two guys, Elusifi and Almaty, they came to play. I mean, it's just so funny to see.
I mean, it's so often we see these guys that are so fun to watch. They use this one gimmick, the Merry Christmas, and they go out early. And so to finally have a player like that, make it to heads up and have the chip lead heads up, and pretty close to finishing things off to take the win is very rare indeed. Unfortunately, so heads up match is only the final 10 minutes of the episode, and clearly some of the early action was skipped because the actual chip counts when they showed them on the screen was not accurate to what we had seen them be when Turner bust in third place. So that was a shame, but at least the action we do get to see was very cool because the very first hand we actually see, Almaty makes a straight and you'll use if he pays off on the person who wants to see the straights when he flops a set. So that was a pretty crazy heads up cooler to get them started on heads up play.
Yeah, I mean, it's just such a fun first hand. I mean, all these hands we've seen, they're just bangers. I mean, they're just so funny to see these two guys just having fun, talking to each other, playing it out, playing whatever cards they have in their hands, and then you get to the last hand, and it's like, wow.
I mean, Almaty makes a pretty amazing fold after Aliotsfi returns a lucky card on the turn. And then loses the chip lead by that point. But, I did not know who had won this match going in. So I was really rooting for Almaty. And I kind of figured, okay, this last hand's coming. He's not in the lead, so he's probably going to lose. But there was Bazonker's shove, and then was Bazonker's response to that shove by calling on the flop on that final hand. I mean, damn, that is just one of the most unique final hands of any final tip we watched at any point in time.
Yusfi makes it ace, has ace 8, he makes 325. Almaty calls with king queen, pretty standard.
6x raise pre-flop, I should mention. The pre-flop raise sizes by Yusfi was going up during heads up match.
Yusfi has a straight draw. He shoves. Almaty snap calls, like beat him into the pot almost.
With the same straight draw, only it's a better straight, but with the worst hand still, with king high versus ace high, and then it goes brick.
And Norm is just exasperated. Like, I couldn't believe it. Wow. It's so funny.
I mean, if Almaty knew that Yusfi had a draw and no pair, then he's probably calling with the king, queen high and a straight draw because I think the math makes sense there. But he's not going to expect the guy to have ace high still and have the straight draw be useless but still having the best hand with ace high.
It's just so crazy. It's just unbelievable.
And honestly, it might ring out there with the most bonkers sort of game mechanic of how the final hand plays out with a Barista on the line that we've seen really. So that was an exclamation point on a great episode to conclude our look back on the Global Championship.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a lot of fun. I mean, if you just want to see crazy, just flat out crazy, you got to watch this episode.
Yes. And so I'm kind of happy that this sort of run episode ends on a high note because really overall, I can't recommend the majority of these episodes on their own. A lot of them kind of fall into that meh, okay, at least it sets the stage of part 2 up category. I mean, the part 2 is for the most part all better than part 1 for these final tables. So that's again my takeaway there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. It's nothing that's super exciting here. I do like how you again get a good sense of what these grinders are like, what the circuit is like, and puts them on display, and you can learn a little bit more about them. But yeah, nothing that's super exciting or noteworthy any which way. You can find a best of compilation of some of these hands online. I've seen a couple of them in reels, and you'd be fine.
Yeah, I mean, the barrier to entry for the circuit scene is significantly less by virtue of the buy-ins being so much smaller than, say, going to Vegas as an amateur, paying $1,000 for one tournament versus a couple $100. Average Joe in New Orleans can afford that. Hopefully, I mean, obviously things are uncertain in the economy all the time, but so it's kind of cool. I mean, in theory, if someone watched this is like, I could probably do that. To get into the circuit scene obviously takes a lot of time, energy, and work, and so, but we don't often hear about those level of players in the poker television world because it's so much about the medium to top pros in the game.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think that concludes our talk here. I hope you guys enjoyed reflecting on these kind of easy to miss episodes of on Poker Go. We are talking about what we should cover next. I think a good idea would be to cover poker movies. There's but I would say the definition of poker movies can vary from person to person. There's movies about poker, movies about people that play poker, movies about a plot where poker is an important element or the main component or side element or something like that. So, Molly's Game, Rounders, All In, Lucky You are 4 examples of movies that have poker in them, but are all different genres of movies too: rom-coms, dramas, comedies, etc. So a lot of variety in how they view poker, because Hollywood's idea of any game or culture is often very different from the actual execution of what culture is, whether it's games or fashion or anything in modern society. It's often inaccurate. So it's always cool to see how awful or how representative of that culture a movie can really be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to watch any poker movies or poker television shows. We're also happy to look at any other bracelet events or any other tournaments you'd like us to look at. Feel free to leave your suggestions in the comment, or you can send us a message, and we'd love to hear from you. And then, of course, anybody who wants to be on the show, we'd love to have you on the show. Send us a message, leave us a comment, whatever you'd like, and we'll try to get you set up.
Not to mention, we have the Worlds of Poker Europe of 2022 on really on our heels here coming up.
Oh, yeah.
And so we'll, be watching and following along and seeing if any of the American pros do decide to go make the trip over to compete there. Hasn't been, I think, as prevalent the last couple of years relative to the pandemic, but we'll see if maybe things mix up this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, guys, from there, we hope you enjoyed our talk here. I hope you enjoy your poker, enjoy your TV, enjoy your poker on TV.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
And happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.